Dear GOP, you'll never wash the stink off you or your party, ever. You know, after the corruption of the Coolidge and Hoover administrations crashed the nation's economy with the Republican Great Depression in 1929, it took a generation or two for the Republican Party to rid itself of its stink. In fact, I'm going to address this to Republicans. After Nixon extended the Vietnam War as his re-election strategy, frankly, he blew up the negotiations in '68 as his primary election strategy also, leading to the unnecessary deaths of tens of thousands of Americans and millions of Vietnamese. It took you Republicans a generation to get rid of the stink of Nixon. But you're never going to get rid of the stink of Donald Trump. Never. At least not in the lifetime of anybody today. I mean, Trump's stench is now a tragic but irrevocable part of American history that will last for generations. I mean, the entire world knows the stink of his whipping up a crowd of thousands to try to assassinate the vice president and the Speaker of the House. His minions urinated on the carpets in the hallowed halls of Congress. They smeared feces on the walls. They damaged priceless paintings from the founding era of our country. They murdered police officers protecting our nation's capital. That stink is never going to fade, no matter how often his allies try to rewrite history or blur faces or tell stories about bizarre deep state conspiracies. Do you think Americans would forget the stink of the 30,000 lies, documented lies, that Donald Trump told America while he was president? Or the lies that he routinely spouts now so often and so bad that Fox News has to put him on time delay and correct the facts when they cover him? How about the reek of his dictator-like statements that he's going to destroy the American civil service and stack our government with corrupt toadies and then imprison his political enemies and send the military into the streets like Maduro has done in Venezuela? Do you really think he'd forget the stink, that we would forget the stink of his sucking up to murderous dictators like MBS and Putin and Kim? Now that effluvium is being smeared all over Republican politicians, one after another, as they follow Trump's orders, no doubt orders he got from Putin, to abandon Ukraine. Republicans, you are cowards, all covered in your wretched, cowardly, unpatriotic stink. This is the man who tried to blackmail a Democratic ally into manufacturing dirt on his political opponent, withholding aid to Ukraine in the face of Russian attacks. Yeah, the stink of that crime was so heinous that he was impeached for it. What about the stink Trump created when he referred to mostly black nations as S-hole countries and our veterans who died in wars as suckers and losers? When he told General Mark Milley he didn't want to ever again share the stage with a wounded veteran because it didn't look good. Or when at the height of the pandemic in April 2020, Trump ordered people back to work and began to ridicule wearing masks, leading to hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths. According to the British medical journal Lancet, 500,000 unnecessary deaths, because at the time, most of the deaths in America were concentrated in 4 blue states, Washington, Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York. And Jared Kushner said it'll be an effective political strategy to encourage these deaths and blame them on the Democratic governors. The stink of mass death. That same son-in-law, by the way, who helped hustle $2 billion out of Saudi Arabia, presumably in exchange for looking the other way about murdering a Washington Post journalist, and their treatment of women in Saudi Arabia. Speaking of women, do you really believe that the stink of your support, Republicans, for a man credibly accused of rape and sexual assault of over 20 women, including one as young as 13, would just go away, even after he was found in a court of law to have raped the first woman whose case finally made it through the court system? Average Americans are struggling to pay their taxes, but Trump pushed through an odious $2 trillion tax cut for himself and his billionaire buddies, creating the largest budget deficit of any president in the history of America. Do you really think America is going to forget the stink of that? Or the stink of Trump's multiple business frauds? He was convicted and forced to pay millions in restitution for his phony Trump University. He was shut down. His phony New York charity was shut down. His New York businesses right now have already been found by a judge to be guilty of tax fraud and insurance fraud and bank fraud. All they're trying to decide now, and Trump's in court today, is what the fine is going to be. Or how about the overwhelming stench of tearing babies from their mother's arms at the border and then trafficking them into phony Christian adoption services that then vanished, leaving over 1,000 grieving families still not knowing the whereabouts of their little girls and boys. Or the stink from the naked campaign lies that Trump told to get votes, promising, oh, we're going to get a new national health care system. Now, I'm going to revitalize America's infrastructure. I support organized labor. All at the same time, he was working against every one of those things. His Department of Labor was actively preventing unionization. Even worse, this adulterer, this guy who had affairs on every single one of his 3 wives, claims to be a super Christian, never even goes to church, claims he's a Christian, and sincerely religious people believed this guy, not noticing the sulfurous smell that surrounds him. They didn't realize that in actual fact, he was only championing the hypocritical televangelist TV multimillionaires who he had cut a deal with, essentially. He would support their tax evasion if they would support him from the pulpit. When he tried to overthrow an election, he knew he lost by 7 million votes and is threatening to try it again. The whole world is aghast at the stink of that tin pot dictator effort, and terrified, frankly, that he might try it again. Germans still struggle with the stink of a leader who referred to his political opponents as vermin and promised he was going to root them out, who attacked the press because they told the truth about him, who played on amplified people's fear of the other. You Republicans will also, for generations, deal with that stink after Trump himself has long shuffled off this mortal coil. It's pathetic how Republican members of Congress are smearing themselves with the slime that has surrounded Donald Trump his entire criminal life. Have you noticed, Republicans, how many of your colleagues are fleeing? Do you really think you can ever wash that stink off yourself? Seriously, Republicans, do you not think that America can smell what's going on? Trump bragging that he's ended women's rights to bodily autonomy, his promotion of guns and assault weapons because his nutcase racist followers think they're going to fight in a great civil war, his refusal to do anything about climate change that's now killing Americans every day. America's had a few truly awful presidents, but Donald Trump is the worst. There is nobody as bad as Donald Trump in the history of the United States. This miserable cartoon of a man, his bizarre orange spray tan, his absurd comb-over, his compensatory phallic-length red ties. America's not going to forget, and many of us are not going to forgive. You will never, Republicans, wash the stink of Donald Trump off yourself.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.